I saw something when I was doing my research on you. You talked about anxiety plus uncertainty equals fear.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, fear. I think fear is fascinating, and so since retiring, I met a buddy of mine. He's a Stanford neuroscientist out in Northern California. His name is Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he and I gelled on
Right
this.
here,
There, yeah,
made for.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and he and I gelled on this concept because he actually he has a lab there where he studies fear, and so we began to really talk about fear and what it is and what makes it up. And fear is certainly a physiological response, but it starts in the brain. That's where fear starts. And so it's basically it's an inability to process the environment. So when you talk about the two elements that make up fear, it's anxiety plus uncertainty. Okay, if you have one or the other, you don't necessarily have fear, right? You can have anxiety without uncertainty. So that might be someone who's nervous about giving the presentation at work next week, right? Knows exactly when it's going to be given, knows exactly what to do, has the presentation ready to go, but is just a little bit anxious about it. Okay, there's no fear there; it's just some anxiety. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Okay, that's basically every kid on Christmas Eve. All right, so that's not fear either. When you start to combine the two, however, that's when the fear response starts to kick in. That's when our amygdala starts to, and our autonomic system starts to kind of boil and bubble. And we start to be faced with two choices, and we've all heard actually three choices. We've heard fight, flight, or flee. No, excuse me, fight, flight, or freeze. Right? Freeze is actually, fight is to deliberately step into the fear. It's not necessarily put your dukes up. Right? It's I'm stepping into my fear. Flee is obviously is step away, retreat from the fear, and then freeze. They've found neurologically is simply a pause. It's an oscillation where one is trying to decide which way to go, fight or flight. Um, the interesting thing is when you choose either direction, a different circuit in the brain fires off. Okay, and the cool thing about when you choose the fight response, when you choose to deliberately step into your fear, you get a dopamine reward by doing so. And that's really what Huberman kind of nicknamed the courage circuit, right? So that switch is flipped, and you get a dopamine reward. It says, "Hey, this is good. Keep going." This is by evolutionary design. We were designed as human beings, as explorers, discoverers, to go out and find stuff, right? It's what's caused us to go from cave dwellers to space explorers in such a relatively
Hmm.
short period of time. The neat thing is, while most people assume dopamine happens at the very end of a goal, at the end of an objective or an outcome, that's not the case. It actually happens every step you take. So every forward step you take into your fear, you get that dopamine reward because it's designed by evolution to keep us going, to keep looking for the new shelter, to keep looking for the new food, not to stop at every step. So this encourages us, quite literally, to have courage. And I talk about courage as one of the attributes, but it's one of these things that we can actually practice and do. And we can actually feel those responses. Quick note on fear, though, because I know most people are interested. Hey, if I start getting fearful, how do I stop being fearful?
Right,
Right?
right.
The quick trick is to control one of those two elements, if not both. Okay. Anxiety is internal. Okay. It's coming from an internal response, right? So it's physiological, which means you can control it with internal physiological things. Breathing helps you shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. That helps your anxiety. There are some visual tools that you can use, and Huberman talks about some. One common one is this thing called open gaze, which is basically the idea that you're staring out ahead of you, and instead of focusing on something, you're just kind of noticing your peripheries, right? That immediately has been shown to start shifting your physiology into a parasympathetic. So you're kind of coming off that autonomic response.
Yep.
So you can manage anxiety that way internally, or you can try to manage the uncertainty, which uncertainty is now external. That's all the stuff external to us.